Bitcoin came about in '09, which was just when the banking crisis was finishing. But if we had a repeat of that, right, a repeat of what went
Right.
on, how much money would go into Bitcoin? And I think that's if you want to see Bitcoin get to 100K fast, then that would be one way to do it. And you don't want to wish on that because obviously we know it hurt a lot of people, but that type of scenario again occurring, you would see. I mean, if we saw that just from a few smaller regional banks failing, imagine what would happen if we got into the big pickle.
Gareth Soloway and Ben Cowen based their analysis on data and charts to assess the macro outlook of the market. The financial crisis of 2008 had immediate repercussions on the banking sector, resulting in bank losses due to mortgage defaults, frozen interbank lending, and limited access to credit for consumers and businesses. This crisis, known as the Great Recession, was a significant global economic downturn that occurred in the late 2000s. Bitcoin, a decentralized digital currency, was subsequently introduced in 2009, emerging in the aftermath of the 2008 global financial crisis. According to Gareth Soloway's prediction, if a crisis similar to the one in 2009 were to happen again, he anticipates Bitcoin's value to reach $100,000. Dollar had the worst week this year amid prospects the Fed will end the current cycle of policy tightening soon. The dollar index showed a 0.2% increase, reaching 99.97 after hitting its lowest point since April 2022 at 99.58. This rise followed 6 consecutive days of losses, the longest losing streak since October 2021, which was influenced by disappointing producer prices data. However, the dollar index has declined by 2.25% throughout the week, indicating the potential for the second consecutive weekly loss and the most significant weekly loss observed in 2023. The Treasury Department announced last month that the national debt had passed $32 trillion for the first time. Soloway predicts that the U.S. dollar's weakness may persist for years due to factors like the substantial U.S. debt, with a significant portion dedicated to interest payments. This situation raises concerns about the U.S.'s ability to effectively manage and resolve the issue. According to Ben Cowen, if central banks globally convert their balance sheets to U.S. dollars and the dollar depreciates against other currencies, it suggests that net liquidity denominated in U.S. dollars would expand. Here are a few glimpses from the discussion that we'd like to show you. Before we proceed, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon for more updates.
We've seen a pretty impressive breakdown just in the last week on the US dollar. And according to me, according to what I'm seeing, I do see some support coming in here, but everything I'm seeing is pointing to eventually further downside in the US dollar. And I was curious as to your thoughts on where we're headed on the US dollar.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say you nailed the U.S. dollar call. I'm pretty sure you were pretty bearish on it the last couple of weeks we were talking about it, and it's broken down, below that 100 level. My views again are somewhat mixed. Like I kind of, and I again, it's not just me like trying to avoid it, but I sort of see the case for both sides. Although I certainly lean to I think I would defer to you in this situation, but there's one part of me that thinks that the U.S. economy is going to be stronger than its counterparts and therefore can handle tightening longer than its counterparts, and therefore the dollar could do well. But there's this other part of me that's like, well, I mean, if we do just go into a recession, we know that the dollar can sell off into that and everything can go down with it. So I'm kind of on the fence there. I see the merit for both claims, but here's the other thing, Gareth. We've talked about net liquidity before,
Mm-hmm.
and here's sort of something that we have to wrap our head around as well. Is if we think about net liquidity, if we at least assume that net liquidity is denominated in U.S. dollars, right, and we assume that the central banks from around the world, if we convert their balance sheet to U.S. dollars, and the U.S. dollar is bleeding against all these currencies, and that means the net liquidity is going up in terms of U.S. dollars, right, because you can convert that other currency to U.S. dollars and get more U.S. dollars for it. So I guess the question is well, if the dollar goes down, that means net liquidity goes up, right? Because if you're taking it from beyond just the United States, right? If you're looking at like the ECB and you're looking at China and Japan, now again they're reducing their balance sheets as well, right? We know the ECB, I think they're even accelerating their QT, but denominated in US dollars, their balance sheet goes up if the dollar loses its value against the euro. So I'm kind of curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's a possibility. I'm looking at more for the potential for the weakness in the U.S. dollar that could drag on for years. And again, there's the difference between short term versus long term. But for me, it's like you look at the U.S. debt now, 32 trillion, and I think I was reading that 800 billion a year is just going to pay interest, right? And so the question becomes, how does the U.S. get out of this? I was just looking at there was actually a chart I was just looking at in tax payments, tax revenue for the government is now falling off a cliff to the downside, which means it's even harder, which ultimately leads to, well, how do you pay it if your revenue is going down, your debt is going up, your interest payments are going up? There's not a lot of options. Either you raise taxes, which isn't going to fly with the government the way it is, or you print money, right? So that kind of breeds, and again, this is more of a 1 to 2 year outlook, maybe potentially not like the next 6 months. But I think that's kind of where I am, and you're right, if we get in a situation where China does invade Taiwan, the dollar is going to spike on that. It's still the safe haven for the globe. But barring those type of scenarios, you got to think at least that it could head down. It's kind of part of the bull case for me on gold as well.
According to Cowen, Bitcoin reached its peak before the US dollar reached its bottom. This suggests that the timing of Bitcoin's peak occurred prior to the US dollar's low point. Bitcoin narrowly avoided a drop below the $30,000 level on Monday, as market sentiment remained uncertain following recent gains. The Bitcoin and United States dollar pair retreated below the important support of 30,000 as investors reflected on the recent developments in the industry. The pair dropped to a low of 29,663, the lowest level since June 30th. It has dropped by more than 7% from the highest point this year. Standard Chartered predicted that the value of Bitcoin, the leading cryptocurrency, could reach $50,000 within this year and potentially rise to $120,000 by the end of 2024. The recent surge in Bitcoin's price is expected to incentivize miners to accumulate more of the cryptocurrency's supply. Soloway predicts that while Bitcoin has the potential for an upward trend, there is also a plausible scenario where it could undergo a drop of 20% or even 40%.
Bitcoin found a top before the dollar found a bottom, if I remember. It's been a few years, but I believe that if I pull over here, the dollar, so the dollar in 2017, it looks like Bitcoin. So Bitcoin actually topped, we know, in late 2017. I believe it was the week of December 17th. So it was over here. The dollar continued down until, almost around February before it actually turned back around. So, I mean, again, there are examples in history where Bitcoin can struggle even if the dollar, or it can top out even if the dollar is still in a downtrend.
Just with Bitcoin dominance going up, again, just to reiterate, it doesn't necessarily guarantee Bitcoin's going to go up from here, right? So Bitcoin could drop 20%, alts could drop 40%, right? And then dominance still goes up in that situation. So just to be aware, and the only reason I bring this up too is if I just flip to my chart, is that there's been some, even though we're still technically stuck in a sideways consolidation, which is usually bullish for Bitcoin, I'm struggling with some factors here, right? So we keep on making these attempts and making even slightly higher highs, and then something's causing Bitcoin to kind of reverse super quickly. Like this candle right here technically fits a topping tail, and topping tail in technical analysis is a bearish indicator. Here we had this beautiful close. It was like the first close or the highest close we've seen. And the next day, Bitcoin fell right back down, negating that entire move up, which again is not confidence building. It's not a good signal for Bitcoin. And then we've just gone sideways. And you can see, actually, I put in a channel now. There's a pretty clear sideways upsloping channel that's kind of keeping price in this range. So I think just from my perspective is that you have to admit that this sideways chop after a move up is usually bullish, but it's not been an easy success breakout situation for Bitcoin. And I do wonder at some point, if this thing can't break out, path of least resistance is to the downside.
In recent weeks, Bitcoin's negative correlation with the U.S. dollar index has weakened. Despite the ongoing sell-off in the greenback, the leading cryptocurrency has faced challenges in gaining upward momentum. However, this situation may not persist for an extended period, indicating the potential for a shift or change in the correlation between Bitcoin and the U.S. dollar. Do you believe this relationship will continue to evolve in the near future? We encourage you to share your views in the comments section. If you found this content informative, please give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for the most up-to-date news and videos. Thanks for joining us.